jazz is no longer a dirty word. When I started, people would say to my father, as a nice middle-class doctor, when is Georgie going to get a job? No, there's respect for jazz. That is the evolution.
Legendary jazz producer and promoter George Wein today on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson. In 1954, a young man from Boston turned his lifelong passion for jazz into an American tradition. 1954 was the year that 29-year-old George Wein organized the first Newport Jazz Festival. And that was an achievement that launched a decades-long career of producing and promoting jazz and helping shape the music along the way. In fact, George Wein also established the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival and co-founded the Newport Folk Festival. But along the way, George Wein, over those decades, also met and worked with and helped shape the careers of many of the most revered and iconic jazz musicians of the 20th century. And he introduced jazz to millions of people worldwide. In 2003, the then 78-year-old George Wein wrote his memoir, a book called Myself Among Others. And that's when I had a chance to spend a few minutes with this music icon. In just a moment, our conversation.
Come back with us now as we relive a little piece of our cultural history on Now I've Heard Everything. This interview is from Bill Thompson's 30-year archive. Enjoy.
So here now from 2003, George Wein.
My first question to you is, how did you find time to write this book?
I didn't find time, I just took time. And that's what you have to do when you decide you want to do it. It took me many years to do the book, three more years. But my problem is I am not a computer person. I don't do word processing, and I'm not a typist in any way. So I had to have someone that could do that and work with me on the research. And in the long run, I did a lot of this with longhand and also with a young woman who was in law school that gave me a lot of time, that just worked with me hour after hour, sitting there at the computer and taking down my thoughts. It's a lot of work. It really is a lot of work.
Well, as evidenced, I mean, this is clearly a very carefully, thoughtfully written book, because you took great care, you explain at the outset, not to just pass along stories that have become legend in the jazz community. These are your personal recollections.
The thing is, I've had the good fortune to know on a relatively intimate basis people like Duke Ellington and Miles Davis and Thelonious Monk and so many other people. And I've had interesting conversations, interesting experiences. One of the most important themes in the book to me, which not too many people seem to grab onto, is the way I gained the trust of these people and the specific incidences where, for instance, with Thelonious Monk, it was in Birmingham, England, and I'd just started touring with him, and we'd established a nice relationship. But I still had to prove myself to him, and it was backstage, and he was in a very garrulous mood and talking in his dressing room, and he was due on stage, and there were some stairs that led up to the stage, and I went down and I said, "Thelonious, you're on." And I went back up on the stage. Well, quickly to tell the story, 5 or 6 times I ran up and down the stage, and Thelonious never responded. I finally yelled at him, "Thelonious, get the hell on the stage." And he went up, and then he played an hour set with 50 minutes of drum solos, or 45 minutes of drum solos. So he came off the stage. I said, "What was that all about, Thelonious?" He said, "You hadn't ought to yelled at me." I said to him, "Thelonious," I ran up and down these stairs 5 or 6 times, and I'm getting too old and fat to do that. And I was, of course, 36 years old, He says, "You mean you ran up and down those stage 5 or 6 times?" I said, "Yes, I don't blame you for yelling at me." And that was the moment that I gained his trust. And so the book has stories like that only are my stories, that weren't apocryphal or legendary or anything like that. And there's a lot of stories like that.
Oh, yeah. The book is jam-packed with stories like that. Your book reads like a who's who of anybody who's been in the jazz or pop world in the last 60 years.
Well, if anyone out there has has attended any of my festivals, which include the Newport Folk Festival, the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival. Folk Festival, of course, was where Dylan went electric, and and Joan Baez and so many people, James Taylor, and made their first appearance before large crowds. And whether it was the cool festivals that played all over the country, I mentioned the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage, the Newport festivals, of course, the JVC festivals, the Verizon festivals, any of those things, any of you out there that might have attended these festivals, you'll find the book very interesting. And but particularly if you love the music and love the people that play the music, because I have. It moves fairly well, the book. I enjoy it myself now. I didn't enjoy it for a while. I was very doubtful about whether I'd finish the book at one time. But when I could see the light at the end of the tunnel, it got exciting. And now I pick it up, and every so often I read it to think of what I left out.
Do you pick it up and read it and amaze even yourself at what you've been through?
It is difficult to go back and say, you mean I did this and I did that and I did this, and because I didn't have a plan in mind. It wasn't like I had an education for what I did, and then I was going to do this. I was going to run for office, or I was going to be a doctor and a great surgeon. I was a pre-med student, and there was no way I was going to be a doctor and a great surgeon. But I always had a mind that kept thinking of doing things. And no matter, even my age now, I'm 77 years old, I'm still totally active. We still do many, many festivals, over 30 events a year. And my mind never stops working. And yet I cannot tell you what I'm going to do next year. The motivation to do things is there. It's not a direction where I knew I was going to produce festivals. I knew I was going to have a club. I knew I was going to tour Europe. I knew I was going to be an international impresario. I never knew those things. They happened because my mind kept working, and if when the opportunity arose, I would do it.
Improvisation is your life.
In a sense, yes, because a very important part of the book is my playing. Because I love to play the piano. I'm not a great pianist by any means, but I'm a professional, and great musicians can play with me and have played with me. I haven't hurt them by working with them. And I just played a few weeks ago in Bern, Switzerland, for five days with this brilliant young violinist, Regina Carter. And it was, people said, "You're going to work with Regina? Regina's going to work with you?" I said, "Well, you've never worked together." She says she wants to do it. We had a ball. She was an inspiration. She brought me back. I hadn't played in 3 or 4 years, and just playing with her brought me back. It was very exciting. And so that's a part of the book, my playing with Sidney Bechet and Lester Young and so many great musicians, Clark Terry and Ruby Braff. And I've played hundreds of concerts around the world, and maybe thousands, I don't know. And all the time I was really not making my living as a musician, but I was having fun.
More fun than you would have had as a doctor, probably.
Oh, a lot more fun. But my father was my biggest fan. He was a doctor.
Oh.
and he was my biggest fan, yeah.
But it occurs to me that there's time after time in this book when you were bringing together various musicians for an event, and you didn't know going in if this was going to be an event or if this was going to be an event with a capital E that people would remember for the rest of their lives.
I did always have one motivation, which was if you're going to do something, try to make it important. Try to make it have meaning and significance. And so sometimes I might have overdone it. I tried something in Washington once which didn't work, and I was always sorry it didn't. I took over the entire Kennedy Center and every hall, and I had jazz in all halls, the 3 main halls and all around the place. And it was a great, I mean, I had Benny Goodman and Sarah Vaughan and Miles Davis, and they were all there. Every Dizzy Gillespie, you name them, they were there, all in a 2-day period. And one ticket price could get you in. And I thought this was going to create something that would be a lasting jazz thing. It didn't make it. And that was one of my great disappointments. And I always felt that the newspapers in town did not get around to support it the way they should, because I'd had experience in New Orleans, which is in the book, how I went to the publishers of the Times-Picayune and said, you people have all these giants walking among you, and the only time you write about them is when they die. You put in an obituary. I says, here we are doing this festival, and you just take it for granted. And after that meeting, the newspapers really got behind the festival, and now the festival is one of the biggest things economically, culturally, and any way you can think of it, to the city of New Orleans. It could have been the same in Washington. I don't know whether it's possible now, but because the music is different. The great names that we had in those days are no longer here. But when a community supports something, and that's what we've learned, and that's in the book, part of the book, you must have the community working with you, not against you. And then things can happen.
After this short break, George Wein talks about the really big way jazz changed in his lifetime.
Are you finding this interview engaging? Curious about the book we're discussing?
Simply click the link in our show notes or visit our website, heardeverything.com, to get your copy.
When you shop through our affiliate links, you're not only enjoying great content, but also supporting this podcast.
Thank you for your support.
Now back to my 2003 conversation with George Wein.
Your book also is a great chronicle of something that you just alluded to, which is the evolution of jazz. Is it significantly different now than when you opened Storyville?
One of the lines in the book is jazz is no longer a dirty word. You know, when I started, people would say to my father, you know, as a nice middle class doctor, when is Georgie going to get a job? And no, there's respect for jazz. That is the evolution. And if I've made a contribution, a major contribution, it's that everybody who plays jazz has a little more respect for what he's done and what he's doing. And I think that shows itself in many, many facets of our cultural civilization, you know.
Now, I have to make one confession to you. As a baby boomer, one of the first chapters I turned to when I got the book was the '69 Newport Festival, which was... I'm sorry to bring it up because I know it's kind of sore for you, but that was, I mean, it occurred to me when you put it in context here, you know, it's the same year as Woodstock. Now you've got, you know, you got Led Zeppelin and you've got Jimi Hendrix wanting to come and you're saying, no, there's no room for you here. You know, it must have been at once a great time, but as you also describe it in your book, it was your nadir. It was your worst time.
It was my worst time because I was beginning to lose faith in my music, which of course was jazz and the festival, because I kept reading the media. The media influenced me. And where Ginger Baker was a better drummer than Elvin Jones, and Ian Anderson was a greater musician than Rahsaan Roland Kirk. And they were writing these things. It's not that I believed that, but they were influencing the sale of tickets to our jazz events. I said, I have to do something to be contemporary to. So I asked a friend of mine, who are these rock musicians that can really play? And so he named Frank Zappa and Jimmy Page and people like that. So I brought them all to Newport. They were all ready to come to Newport. That was a big thing to them. And what we did was we turned Newport into a rock festival, into a jazz festival. And I said, never again. I don't want to do that. And it was true. I got a call from Jimi Hendrix, whom I didn't know how he got my number. And he says, George, everybody's going to Newport. I want to be there. I said, Jimmy, I don't have any room for you, you know. And people that you didn't have room for Jimi Hendrix. Jimi Hendrix is a god, but not to me. He was a guitar player, you know, who burned his guitars or whatever it was.
You know, you may be the only promoter in history ever to turn down Jimi Hendrix.
And it has to do that my idols were not Jimi Hendrix or my idols were Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong, and they're still my idols, you know, and Art Tatum and Charlie Parker and Miles and Dizzy and those people that really had a musical influence, not a pop culture influence.
And isn't it remarkable that when you tell stories about them, the stories that may be 50 years in the telling, But they still resonate. So it's like they're still with us. Their music they are the true geniuses of this business.
They changed the whole structure of music. I mean, even the rock artists that we talk about, the way they phrase, the way they play came from the phrasing of Louis Armstrong and the music, and you wouldn't recognize it except as you see the way they do play a melody, that they're playing behind the beat or things like that, which are fundamental changes in the music that Armstrong created,
And everybody wants to be the next Billie Holiday or the next Duke Ellington, and there is no next Billie Holiday or Duke Ellington, is there?
No, that's impossible. But what you can have is a transition back to acoustic music that might bring out talent in a different way. And we have two singers that have done this now, Diana Krall and Nora Jones, who've made hit records just with the simplistic approach of acoustic music, just a trio accompaniment. And that's good to hear. I mean, they're not Billie Holiday, they're not Ella Fitzgerald, they are themselves. But it means that there is a public out there that does not have to be bombasted with volume and part of some fireworks or showbiz thing, where the music itself, where the song speaks for itself. That's our hope for the future.
And I'm running out of time, but we haven't even gotten into the whole idea that you have helped shape America's racial attitudes. I mean, this is a huge part of the story when you started.
It's very important to me, the racial attitude in the book. I'm married to an African-American woman since 1959, and she's been a very important part of my life. And going to New Orleans before the Civil Rights Bill was passed, and all through different areas where we've encountered different types of prejudices. One, black against white, white against black. I mean, and how we worked with the different people and influenced those around us. It's not that we made any startling political changes, but we have, in the way we worked, influenced the area in which we worked. And it's important that you do that. And there are stories in there that show the little things you might do will have an effect on people that you never realize you're reaching. So we're proud of those stories, and that's very important to me in the book.
George Wein died in 2021. He was 95. Now you can get your copy of Myself Among Others by George Wein by tapping the link in our show notes, by clicking the link in the description below if you're listening to this on YouTube, or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. HeardEverything.com is where you can also find my 1989 conversation with a great jazz musician, Lionel Hampton.
Louis said, "What's that sitting in the corner?" And I explained to him that it was a Viber harp. And so Louis said, "Can you play it?" And I said, "Yeah, I never played it before in my life."
And my 1994 conversation with the man who helped organize Woodstock, Elliot Tiber.
We didn't know it was an event the world was paying attention to. We couldn't see newspapers. We couldn't watch TV. We were busy in the rain and the mud trying to do what they call today is damage control. Then it was called surviving.
And of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you can find us everywhere you find podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, get ready to make your mouth water, because we're going to talk with the former CEO of Ben & Jerry's, Fred Chico Lager.
Cherry Garcia was a flavor that was suggested to us by two deadheads by way of an anonymous postcard. They said that we should name a flavor after Jerry Garcia, and they assured us that it would sell because dead paraphernalia always sold. And sure enough, they were right.
That's next time on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.